Hello everyone and welcome to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andrew Bentley, and here at the Commander's Forge, it's just a spot for me to talk about Commander and Magic in general in the ways that I enjoy playing it. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I've taken you through different styles of decks that I've played and examples of those decks. This week, we're going to talk about tempo in Commander and the way that I play it. Now, tempo for me is using small spells to increase our value and decrease our opponent's value. Now, in 1v1, you might think, okay, a bounce spell, or countering a spell that gives you an effect. The way I look at it in Commander is turning small value into large plays. And I'll get into that with the deck. But my basic thought on the matter is you want to stockpile cards in your hand and your graveyard that you can then recast, reduce the price of, copy, and string together enough to just dome your opponents for so much damage. So much. Now, I don't see tempo as being just one style of play. For me, tempo is combining styles of play that include heavy card draw, price reduction, copying, being able to interact, because your main game plan isn't always going to work, and you need to have a way to back it up, whether that be a counter spell or a protection spell or just casting enough stuff to make your creatures big enough to survive a damage-based board wipe or combat. And yeah, I get that this kind of falls into an aggro deck sometimes, but you can't really call it an aggro deck if it's running less than 20 creatures. And that's, in my opinion, anyway. Now, I don't think this episode's going to be terribly long, but you never know once I get into the deck tech. So let's hear a quick word from our sponsor, and then we will get into Adeli's Wiznerds. Hi, if you haven't heard about Anchor, let me tell you some of the reasons why I started using it. For one, it's free. There's no subscription fee. You don't have to pay for anything. Second, it gives you all of the editing software you need for everything you're going to do. Beyond that, it helps distribute your podcast to so many different places, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. It's amazing. Not only that, but they offer to sponsor you. Right there. That's it. Just by recording podcasts, they will pay you based on the number of listens it gets. It brings everything you need into one place. And if you want to try it out, you can download their app, or you can go to anchor.fm to get started. Now back to the episode. Alright, and jumping right into our deck tech for Adeli's the Cinderwind, for my deck called Wiznerds. Yes, I know, it's a bad pun. It's what I do. Adelise is a 2/2 human wizard for 1, a blue, and a red. She has flying and haste, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, wizards you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Now, the real kicker here is the deck doesn't run a ton of creatures because at its base it's still a spellslinger deck. The total creature count is only 18, which means they all have to do something. And yes, there's always those few that are constantly on the chopping block, and there's a few that are like placeholders for when something better comes out. But then, you have a couple that reduce costs. Keeping cards in our hand is fairly important, so you've got a couple that wheel, like Jace's Archivist and Magus of the Wheel. There's another way this deck tries to accrue value is recasting spells. So our Snapcaster Mage and Dreadhorde Archivist are pretty important on that front. But one of the things the deck desperately needs is card draw. And anybody that's familiar with a wizard deck is going to call you crazy if you're not running Azami, Lady of Scrolls. Now, Azami is 2 blue for a human wizard. She is a 0/2. And she says, tap an untapped wizard you control, draw a card. Where this gets really good is it gets around summoning sickness because you're tapping a wizard to her ability, which is just, it's what you want to be doing. Now, the other way we can get away with having such a low creature count, even though we're not running certain cards like Tauren Sky Summoner, Young Pyromancer, or anything that's making those tokens, is we are running Docent of Perfection, which is 3 blue for a 5/4 insect horror. You'll notice that's not a wizard, but it has flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you put a 1/1 blue human wizard creature token onto the battlefield. Then if you control 3 or more, you transform it, and it becomes Final Iteration, which is a 6/5 Eldrazi insect. It still has flying, and it still says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you put a 1/1 blue human wizard creature token onto the battlefield, but wizards you control get +2/+1 and have flying. Yeah, it's the one exception I will make for a non-wizard in the deck. Now, this is at its base an Isochron Scepter deck, which is a 2-mana artifact that says Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand. Then you can pay 2, tap it, and copy the exiled card. But the important bit here is it says if you do, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Because normally when you copy something, it's not casting it, but just putting a second copy on the stack. Isochron Scepter gets around that, so we still get certain spells like, well, I believe the only storm spell we have left right now is Grape Shot, which has Storm, and it's just a stupid little, it deals 1 damage to any target. But Storm specifically says when you cast this spell, you copy it for each spell you cast before it this turn, and you can choose new targets. So if you have that under Isochron Scepter, and you cast, say, 4 other spells, then you make the copy of Grape Shot, you're going to get the additional 4 copies of Grape Shot. And while those don't count towards spells that Adelies will trigger off of, that's fine. It's there to accrue more value. But that also brings us to stuff like Twin Cast, which is 2 blue to copy an instant or sorcery, and you can choose new targets for the copy. Mission Briefing, which is a instant version of Snapcaster Mage, where you surveil 2, then you choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard, and you can cast the card this turn. If the card would be put into a graveyard this turn, you exile it instead. And surveilling is you look at the top 2 cards, and you can choose to either leave them on top of your library or put them into your graveyard. Then we're also running Increasing Vengeance, which is 2 red, to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. But if you cast the spell from a graveyard, you copy that spell twice instead, and you can choose new targets for the copies. The reason it's worded like that is because it has flashback for 3 red. Or, again, with Mission Briefing, we can cast it from our graveyard by just paying the 2 red, or with Snapcaster Mage, or with Dreadhorde Archivist. We're also running Spell Twine, which I believe is the highest converted mana cost in the deck. At 5 and a blue, you get a sorcery that says exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You copy those cards, and again, you get to cast the copies, if able, without paying the mana cost, and then you exile Spell Twine. So you can't do this by casting it several times out of the graveyard, but if you have a ton of mana, you can cast Spell Twine, targeting Twin Cast in your graveyard and something else in somebody else's graveyard. Then Twin Cast becomes a copy of Spell Twine, and you get to do it again. And if you have another copy spell, you can copy it again. It's just, I understand it's expensive, but you can do stupid stuff with it, and I enjoy doing stupid stuff. Speaking of more stuff we can do from the graveyard, we have Mystic Retrieval, which is 3 and a blue, that returns an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and it has flashback for 2 and a red. Now, we're running several different ways to copy spells, so I figured it wouldn't be bad to include a Twinning Staff, which is a 3 mana artifact that says if you would copy a spell 1 or more times, instead copy it that many times plus 1 additional time. You may choose new targets for the additional copy. And if worse comes to worse, and we just really need to copy a spell, you can pay 7 and tap it to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control and choose new targets for the copy. Now, I've played a few games with this where people keep my creatures under control and I just don't get to do much. That's kind of the downside of playing tempo, is you still need to be able to protect yourself. And nothing is as degenerate as what I ended up doing the other day, which was Isochron Scepter with an imprinted Mana Drain. Now, Mana Drain is blue for an instant that says counter target spell at the beginning of your next main phase. Add an amount of colorless mana to your mana pool equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So, as you can imagine, I was able to power out my hand, hit a couple card draw spells, and in that game, I ended up casting Thrill of Possibility, which is 1 and a red. For as an additional cost, you discard a card and you draw 2 cards, copied 4 times. So the way that spell works with copying it is you only pay the additional cost once. So I discarded 1 card and drew 8. And that's true of anything that says discard a card as an additional cost. There's just... I'm focusing on drawing cards. I'm focusing on protection, card selection. My removal is not super deep, but we are running everybody's favorite card to hate, Cyclonic Rift, which is 1 and a blue for an instant that says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Or, more commonly, you overload it for 6 and a blue and you replace every instance of target with each. Good old Vandal Blast, same thing. It's a red for a sorcerer that destroys an artifact you don't control, or you can overload it for 4 and a red. Pyroclasm. Pyroclasm's funny, because if Adeliz is out, she would normally die to the 2 damage that Pyroclasm deals. But because you cast the spell, she then has 3 power. It's just one of those stupid interactions where you can get rid of somebody's small blocker and then get in for some damage. There is a build of this deck that I thought about building where instead of Wiznerd tribal shenanigans, it was just going to run Zada Hedron Grinder and just try and go full pump spells. That might still be a thing. But yeah, like, it's got counter spells. It's running stuff like Past in Flames, which is 3 and a red. For each instant a sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback till end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and it itself has flashback for 4 and a red mana. Through shenanigans of the scale, I cast a card called Frantic Search, which is 2 and a blue. It's an instant that says, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and then untap 3 lands. I had a game where I cast 6 copies of the spell and then recast it from my graveyard an additional 2 times. And the way that works is you can float mana and then untap lands that are going to tap more than 1 mana, or you can float all your mana and then untap the lands that you're going to need for different colors of mana. It is the only spell I'm running that untaps lands like that. But my god, does it get into some shenanigans. I believe the rest I'm just gonna kind of leave in the description with the deck list. And I know this is a relatively short one, but with the holiday and me dealing with a problem with a tooth, I think this is probably the best that I'm going to be able to muster. So I'm thinking about changing up the format, and instead of doing a super edited with all the pictures on YouTube, I'm just going to copy what I'm doing on Anchor and upload audio only. But if you are watching this on YouTube, if you'd enjoyed it, hit the like button, consider subscribing. If you do, hit the bell for notifications. And I'll see you next week. That brings us to the end of the podcast. I would like to thank Nate and Erica Jacobs for designing my logo, and Cody Mulphy and Ian Foss for allowing me to use a sample of music from their band The Crypt. The podcast can be found on YouTube by searching Commander's Forge. The podcast is Commander's Forge, that is CMDR_Forge on Twitter. I can be found on Twitter at BentzMr, that is BENTZMR. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, here's to fun games and sick plays.